Coming up, a new book highlights Indigenous teachings for living well. We'll visit with one of the authors. Plus, Good Relatives is the new name of a campaign by social justice organization IllumiNative. We will learn more. And what is Nancy Pelosi's record in Indian country? Holly Cook Macarro breaks it down for us. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews plus headlines from the ICT newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian Country Today. Working with award-winning professors, Cronkite students learn news reporting, social media, shooting and editing videos, and producing content for communications industries. Cronkite's 15 professional programs give students the opportunity to cover critical issues throughout the U.S. and beyond. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Amarawa Hopa, thank you for joining us. Around the United States, many people are gearing up for Thanksgiving. That holiday, of course, comes with complex feelings for many Indigenous people. Over 400 years ago, it was the Wampanoag people who first encountered the Pilgrims who arrived on the Mayflower. That is the basis for the common tale told at Thanksgiving, one of sharing and gratitude between two groups of people. Stephen Peters, a citizen of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, says all these years later, this dominant narrative has overlooked what actually happened.
It has to do with cultural genocide, forced assimilation, language, traditions, culture ripped away from us. That's the story, and you can see why it doesn't necessarily align with the narrative that was created around the Thanksgiving holiday, which to us has very little to do with that harvest festival that took place in 1621.
The Mashpee Wampanoag tribe observes a day of mourning on Thanksgiving to bring awareness to the true story of this holiday. The Indian Child Welfare Act is labeled the gold standard in child welfare policy in the U.S. ICT's Pacey Smith-Garcia has more from Indigenous leaders who are speaking out about a new Supreme Court case that could impact that hallmark law.
On November 9th, the U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments in the case Burkine versus Holland. Indigenous leaders say the case puts tribal sovereignty at risk because it has the potential to overturn the Indian Child Welfare Act. Called ICWA, it was created in 1979 to prevent the removal of Indigenous children from their homes, families, and culture. It currently sits at the Supreme Court after a couple sued the federal government claiming ICWA was discriminatory and sought to keep non-Native children with their families rather than non-Native families who want to care for them. Indigenous leaders pushed back against this claim and gathered outside the High Court to make their voices heard. Many families are concerned about the future Native children may face if ICWA is struck down. Chairman of the Morongo Band of Mission Indians, Charles Martin, explained this feeling to the crowd.
We will not go back to the days of intolerance and policies of assimilation and that sought to sweep away our people and our culture. Where we fight to keep that alive, the dream.
Principal Chief of the Cherokee Nation, Chuck Hoskin Jr., is confident the court will uphold the landmark case.
I certainly think we will win because I think the facts and the law is on the side of Indian country. We don't always win in this courtroom, but I feel that we will win based on the stellar job the legal team did today and in the days and months leading up to this case. However, Indian country, tribal leaders, tribal citizens are always wise to be vigilant because the government of the United States historically has taken away, has terminated, has dispossessed. We are only now in a modern era in which it's relatively better, which we have relatively better federal Indian policy. So even when we win this case, and I believe we will win this case, we've got to stay vigilant. We've got to be on guard for other losses. We've got to be on guard for erosion in the Congress of the United States. But I feel optimistic today based on the job that was done in the courtroom.
In Phoenix, Arizona, Pacey Smith-Garcia, ICT.
An Indigenous woman who dedicated her life to fighting pipelines has died. Cheyenne River Sioux citizen and water protector Joy Braun was the national pipeline organizer for the Indigenous Environmental Network. The grassroots advocate was well known for traveling across Turtle Island to support Indigenous voices speaking out against extraction and colonization. Candy White, programs director for IEN, remembers Braun as someone with a big heart that would give her last meal or pair of moccasins to anyone in need. IEN said in a statement that Braun died at her home on November 13th at age 53. Well, a major organization is saying a longtime practice used in admissions is discriminatory. Last week, the American Medical Association adopted a new policy urging medical schools to remove questions about blood quantum from the process for American Indian and Alaska Native students applying to medical school. AMA board member Madeline Butler said questions about blood quantum are a barrier for applicants who are pursuing a medical education. She said these barriers further exacerbate the shortage of Native people in the medical field. The organization also says it is working on a strategic plan to reduce racial biases for those in medical training programs. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. When it comes to health and wellness, Indigenous perspectives are often overlooked, but experts Chelsey, Luger, and Thosh are working to change that. They recently co-authored the book called The 7 Circles, Indigenous Teachings for Living Well. Chelsey joins us in studio today to talk about reclaiming ancient wisdom. Hi, Chelsey. Thanks so much for being here.
Hi, Aaliyah. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So let's start off. You and I were just talking about the cover of your book. Tell us a little bit more about, what the book is and sort of preview it a little bit for us.
Well, it's called The 7 Circles, and it entails 7 different areas of life that we believe our ancestors really thrived in and retained unique teachings associated with. And of course, we've carried on those teachings and we've carried on those traditions despite any hardships or barriers that we've faced over the years. And to this day, Indigenous people have very unique ways of talking about wellness, and we have unique teachings associated with how to live a balanced life mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. So that's what our book is about.
You and your husband, of course, have been doing this work for some time. Has it always been in your plan to write a book, or maybe tell us about your process?
Yeah, absolutely not, because it's something that, you don't get to just, call up a publishing company and say, hey, I want to write a book. Like, they kind of had to come to us. And so we were just thrilled from day one when we got signed with a literary agency, and then eventually when we decided to go with the company that we're with, Harper One, which is an imprint of HarperCollins, and we've just been overjoyed, and it's been a very surreal and exciting process all along the way.
I can imagine. And of course, maybe tell our viewers a little bit more about the ideas that are incorporated into this book. You already talked about it more, but if someone was picking this up, what can they expect to learn?
So they can learn about Indigenous worldview and how it relates and how it understands wellness and interprets the concept of wellness and living in balance in a different way from what you often see. In the Western world, everything is separated into different categories, and in the Indigenous world, we recognize the interconnection of mental, physical, spiritual, emotional well-being. And all of these areas overlap, and what we hope is that this is an inviting perspective that doesn't put people in a deficit mindset, but rather makes people feel that they're welcome and they're already on their wellness journey, and give yourself credit for that, and let's see how we can continue to take it from there.
I want to talk about COVID-19, of course, because when we talk about health and wellness, I think that impacted us all so deeply. Maybe talk about, people who are feeling like really bogged down or really just heavy right now coming out of COVID, what they can sort of take away from it at this time in particular.
Yeah, so certainly illness, COVID, any of these hardships that we face in life are a part of life. And we always say that in order to live in balance, you have to experience those moments where you are totally thrown off and out of balance and not feeling your best. And we accept that and embrace that as a part of the human experience. And we recognize that our teachings have brought us through so much. We have so much resiliency built within us. We have so much strength, and we can always return to that whenever we're ready.
Tell us what it was like to work with your husband on writing a book. Are you guys like it looks like it on social media, you're like the great team, but what was that like when you were down to the nuts and bolts?
Yeah, we have our little arguments here and there. Sometimes it's really hard because we have so many deadlines to meet and stuff like that. But for the most part, our work relationship has always been good because he's a photographer, I'm primarily the writer, and so he contributed these full color, gorgeous photos that you'll find all throughout the book. I mean, I think the photography is probably the best part of the book, in my opinion, so I really credit Thosh with that. He's been a photographer for decades, and so I kind of managed a lot of the writing aspect, though we both contributed, I contributed visually and he contributed writing as well. So it is a balance in the way that we work together, and I think that's why our relationship works and that's why our work works.
I want to talk about what the reaction has been to this book because it, of course, has been released, I think, a few weeks ago. So maybe tell us what you've heard from people who have read it.
Yeah, it came out on October 25th, and both the critical reviews and the sort of anecdotal reviews from readers have been so positive, so great. All of our book signing events have been totally sold out, standing room only. There's lots of bookstores around the country that are selling out of the book, and we're just thrilled. I mean, we feel so embraced by our community, and so we're really grateful and really proud to represent Indigenous community in this wellness space.
What's next? What kinds of projects are you working on? I mean, coming off of a book is, a big deal, but when we're looking at the future, what's next for you too? Yeah,
next thing is just continuing to do more of the work. And our priority has always been continuing to work within community, within Indian country, and offering wellness workshops and everything that we've always done. That's what we're just going to keep doing.
Fantastic. Well, Chelsey, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good Relatives, that is the name of the newest campaign launched by nonprofit social justice organization IllumiNative. It was launched last week and will explore the complexity of what it means to be Indigenous. Joining us to share more is Echo Hawk, who is the executive director and founder of the organization. Hi, Crystal.
Hi, Leah. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I love your earrings, by the way, but let's get into the nuts and bolts here. I understand that this campaign came from some data from the 2020 census, so maybe let's start there and tell us how that played into this campaign.
Absolutely. It was, I think, a shock to everyone with the 2020 census because, so many people were worried just because of COVID and the undercount. But what was really remarkable is that there was an 87% increase in people reporting either Native identity alone or Native identity plus at least, one or more races. And so it's incredible to see now that, according to that census, we're well over 10 million people in the United States. And to really look at more and more increasingly, I think people are embracing their Native identity. And I think it's, that's a huge increase. And it's something that I think that we're really interested in exploring. And I think it's also really indicative when you look at the number of people, claiming a multiracial Native identity. I think that that's so much about who we are today in the 21st century. And it's something that we really want to explore.
So it sounds to me like this campaign essentially really talks about what it means to have that complex identity, like you just said.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think, IllumiNative's mission is really looking at how we build power for Native peoples and really how we change the narrative. And I think the way, particularly that non-Native people and non-Native institutions look at us. And I think, we have long been defined as, sort of these people, that existed only before 1900, that we have to look a certain way. We have to look how we did in the 19th century, and to really look at the way that Native identity has evolved, and that we, come in all colors, shapes, sizes. We come from a lot of different backgrounds, and increasingly, again, we're really exploring in communities around Afro-Indigenous identity, really looking at our Latinx and Indigenous relatives to the south of the border, to looking at our LGBTQ Two-Spirit relatives, and so many more. I mean, we're just such a diverse, multifaceted community. And I think, the mainstream America has often just defined us as a monolith and wanting to define us in a very specific way. And I think this campaign is, again, really about exploring the diversity, the beauty, the complexity of Native identity in the 21st century. And I think it's going to be not only a powerful, campaign and ongoing conversation that we're going to, be helping to, create over the next year, but I think it's going to be a really important conversation internally within Indian country, right? As we really begin to look at, our diversity and just the way our population is growing.
Tell us how this campaign is going to be rolled out. We've seen in previous IllumiNative campaigns, you all do like a lot of informational sessions, videos, social media campaigns, but how are we going to see this campaign roll out?
Well, one of the biggest first kickoff pieces that's going to be coming next week is the most gorgeous film by Creek filmmaker Kyle Bell. And he really partnered with these two incredible, spoken word artists to really, he calls it setting the table. And I think it's just really an opening, film that really just talks about our history, our resiliency, our contributions, right? And just the different things that we've gone through as Native peoples, but how strong and vibrant we are. And I think really calling people into this circle to begin this, conversation and exploration. And then I think, what we have to look forward to, over the next year is really about us curating conversations, via, short films. I think we're looking at almost like a short digital, talk show series, because we want to also get into really, challenging issues as we see around Native identity. We want to talk about issues like blood quantum and citizenship. There's oftentimes been sort of a toxic conversation happening online about pretendians. Is there a way that we can have these conversations about Native identity, citizenship, other types of things, but in a good way, in a way where we're really coming from a place of our values? I mean, I think we're also, always looking at how we're going to partner with different artists, comedians, and really, I'm hoping that we're going to be able to partner also with Native journalists to really explore the diversity of stories in our ever-changing Indian country, right? There's just incredible populations. We have a growing Native Muslim population, for example. There's incredible dynamic, population up in the Northwest of, Native and Asian communities. I mean, it's really exciting. And so I think we're going to make this a really multifaceted campaign and really call, people in to be a part of this conversation in a good way.
Crystal, I want to offer a moment of reflection in terms of what IllumiNative has done this year. I mean, there have been a number of campaigns and initiatives that have been worked on, but when you're looking back at the year, sort of what resonates with you most?
I mean, I think it's just the growth in conversation. I mean, I think it's been such an exciting year with everything that's been happening in pop culture, for sure. And I know that has been such a big part of, what we've enjoyed celebrating with Indian country, right? Is really looking at the success of Reservation Dogs, Rutherford Falls, Molly of Denali, Spirit Rangers. And I think that has been a huge part, of us just really celebrating and amplifying, that kind of work. I think also, we just have really enjoyed celebrating a lot of the explorations and community with the LGBTQ Two-Spirit community. And we've been able to do some really fun things. And I think, the other part I know that we've really enjoyed working on is our Indigenous Futures event down at the Santa Fe Indian Market, and really being a part of exploring that conversation about what, our Native futures and Native identity looks like 100 years from now. And so it's been an incredible year.
Absolutely. Well, Crystal, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Last week, Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi announced she will be stepping down from Democratic Party leadership after nearly 20 years. To Democrats, she has been a powerful figure, most notably as the first woman to be the Speaker of the House. Republicans, of course, have painted Pelosi in a very different light, often deeply criticizing her. ICT regular contributor Holly Cook-Macarro joins us now virtually to weigh in on what Pelosi's legacy has been for Native communities. Hi, Holly.
Hi, Aaliyah. It's good to see you.
Same here. I want to just jump right in here. When you heard the news of Nancy Pelosi stepping down from Democratic leadership, what was your immediate reaction?
You know, I wasn't very surprised given some of the recent events and the new landscape, but I will admit it was still a bit of an emotional moment for me. My husband and I watched her floor speech together, and as she spoke, we reflected on how lucky we've been to have shared some amazing memories and times with her over the last 25 plus years. And there were a few tears. You know, I think back on all of the opportunities that Speaker Pelosi has given tribal governments, and I should rephrase that from opportunities, but she has made sure that we had a rightful place at the table during her time as Speaker and leader of House Democrats. It has been an extraordinary stretch, and that moment, it just I kind of flashed back through all of those and over some extraordinary moments. But you know, I understand why she might want to step aside and let that new leadership flood in, that younger generation that has been really been called for, I think, by some of the younger folks and newer members of her caucus, and those up in broadly in the Democratic Party as well. But it was an emotional moment. I'm very sorry to see her leave the speakership.
Holly, I'm wondering if you think that the attack on her husband had anything to do with her stepping back.
I have to imagine that it does. It was brutal and vicious, and my heart sank that morning when I saw the news break and thought, oh my, you know, this is going to be a developing story as it goes on. I really, you know, hope that Nancy and Speaker Pelosi and her husband Paul are going to be okay. You know, they have a large, a very, you know, tight family. Paul Pelosi is a huge figure in his own right, both physically and in the way he moves in this world. So um, you know, that hits at the heart of a family when you know the husband, the father, the grandfather is so brutally attacked. And with those, you know, I think I talked about this back on post January 6th, when the attackers of the U.S. Capitol were chanting, "Where's Nancy?" And when for him to enter the House and say the same thing, it really is, you know, a horrible, I think, flashback to that time. And so yes, although I did keep saying to myself, I know what she's saying. I know she's saying, if I quit, they win. And I know that was a consideration as well. But you know, this new landscape, the calls for new leadership, this was the time for her, obviously.
Holly, I'm wondering if you can reflect on maybe any single achievement or initiative that Speaker Pelosi has achieved for Native communities specifically.
You know, there is a list, but I'm going to point to one because in my memory, and again, in 25 plus years, it was remarkable. On the eve of the passage of of Obamacare, the ACA, Speaker Pelosi called in about a dozen tribal leaders. You recall that we had been trying for years for the permanent reauthorization of the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act, and it was on the table. It was probably maybe Friday, and you know, it passed a couple of days later. But obviously, a time of intense negotiations. And we had Congressman Becerra really leading the fight for us over at Ways and Means. We had Frank Pallone, at Energy and Commerce. But there were also some tribal leaders who didn't think it was doing enough. And we really had to make our voice clear. And Speaker Pelosi called in about a dozen tribal leaders. And if you look at the picture of that, it's really kind of a beautiful thing to see, just some of these older tribal leaders, some of whom have gone on since then, but folks who've really been influential. But she took the time to bring us to the table and have that conversation, hear about the tribe's priorities. And at the end of the day, the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act was included as part of Obamacare and made permanent.
Holly, we only have a short time left here, but I'm wondering if you can comment on who her successor could be and, you know, what you expect there.
It seems clear that Hakeem Jeffries will be the next leader of the House of Democrats. He has long been on that glide path and moving in that direction. I really hope that he also takes the lead from Speaker Pelosi in ensuring that tribes are at the table, a rightful place at the table, are consulted, have that same sort of access to the highest echelons of the party. And it's been so important because while there are 435 members of the House, only about a third of those have tribes in their district. And so we really need that leadership voice from on high to make sure that tribes' voices and tribes' voices are represented and tribal sovereignty is protected. Those are really big shoes to fill. We've never had a Speaker of the House who's done as much for Indian country as Nancy Pelosi has.
Well, Holly, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Aaliyah.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
Sometimes you got to take a stand, just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
The Sand Creek Massacre, the betrayal that changed Cheyenne and Arapaho people forever, focuses on tribal accounts of Colorado's deadliest day. Exhibition details at historycoloradocenter.org.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.